Women have the power to transform this world. We can end crime and violence if we all agree to do one thing: share. Let's share our wisdom, share our time, share our talents, share our finances, but most of all, let's share our love. This is the female solution.
Good evening. I'm Chinta Strausberg, host of the On the Case program, and I have a very, very special guest today, and his name is John E. Adams. He is the founder and executive director of the Bronzeville Trail Task Force and former chief financial officer of the historic Rainbow Push Coalition. John Adams, thank you for being on the case.
I am honored to be here with you, Chinta. I'm just deeply honored to share our history, share our story, and certainly continue to do the work to move our people forward.
There are a lot of secrets in Bronzeville, and a lot of history. So tell us about this. Why did you get interested in this in the first place? And Bronzeville wasn't Bronzeville years ago; it was some other community. So why was it changed?
Yeah.
Did you do that?
So you asked a couple of different questions, and then I'll tell you my story. So I'm homegrown Bronzeville, born and raised in Bronzeville. I went to elementary school in Bronzeville, Corpus Christi Elementary School. Went to high school in Bronzeville, Hales Franciscan High School. Bought my first home in Bronzeville for $11,000.
$11,000.
Which we hardly pay the taxes today. And then in the early 90s, I worked at Hales Franciscan High School, and then certainly at Rainbow Push. So I've worked in Bronzeville as well. And as a CPA, I had clients, other clients that were also in Bronzeville. So Bronzeville just runs in my veins. And in January 2020, Chinta, I just began, and nothing but divine intervention, I began to imagine what's going on with this embankment. So I could only, in my subconscious, Chinta, imagine that I must have seen an article, about the Bloomingdale 606 or some other trail, but I can't point to anything in particular as to why. I was curious about the embankment. So I called a semi-retired architect buddy of mine who lived in Phoenix. He went on Google Earth, and he said to me, "John, it has potential." And so I like to tell this story because in February of 2020, Chinta, you might recall the NBA All-Star game was in Chicago. In fact, Rainbow Push had a big celebration around the NBA All-Star game. But by mid-March of 2020, everything is shut down. The state shut down, the city shut down, coronavirus. And I, just like everyone else, found myself at home with some extra time on my hands, and began to tool around on a couple of projects, and this was one of them. Throughout the summer, I sort of built a kitchen cabinet, if I may, of people I would speak to, consultants, activists, etc. And then by September of 2020, we incorporated the Bronzeville Trail Task Force. September 2020. We spent the fall, Chinta, sort of building our board. Interestingly, three amazing people who were on our initial board were people literally I never knew. I met them on social media, met them on Facebook, but they were doing amazing things in Bronzeville, and they were invited to join us in this initiative. By first quarter of 2021, we reached out to Alderman Dow, and as you know, the famous saying, Chinta, in Chicago, don't nobody want nobody that nobody sent. So we knew we needed to reach out to elected officials. And Alderman Dow immediately said, I need to connect you with the Commissioner of the Department of Planning and Development, Maurice Cox. And so we had our first conversation with Cox late April of 2021. By June of 2021, we met with Commissioner Cox and some of his deputies to talk about the project. And it was only then that we learned, Chinta, some very important facts. And that is that the embankment was owned by units of government. And so these projects are known as rails to trail projects. And they really have proliferated over the last 50, 60 years throughout the country. And typically the challenge in these projects, Chinta, is that the rights of the rail lines are still owned by the railroads, different railroad companies. And so typically in these projects, when activists and community groups or government attempt to develop a rails to trail project, it may take them 10 years, 20 years before they get the rights to the abandoned rail lines. Literally, that's the case of a project here in Chicago that's been worked on for 20 years, and they still don't have the rights to the rail line. So we were very fortunate to learn that essentially 80% of the embankment is owned by the Cook County Land Bank, and 20% is owned by the city of Chicago. So it made it really easy for us to reach out to elected officials to begin the conversation. And at this juncture, and every elected official we reached out to supports the project, even in writing. And so that's how we've been able to kind of move this project, because keep in mind, we don't anticipate, Chinta, that the Bronzeville Trail Task Force will own the trail. It's a municipal project. It's a public works project. So, all of the contracting and development of the project of the trail will go through units of government, very much like the Bloomingdale Trail on the north side of Chicago. So we are in the process now of, and so just kind of fast forward, because I know you have many, many questions for me.
Take your time.
Take my time. Okay.
Yes.
The city of Chicago, it took us 4 years, Chinta, to get a financial commitment from the city of Chicago. And on October 15th, we met with Commissioner Sierra Boatwright, Commissioner Boatwright. Commissioner Boatwright is commissioner over the Department of Planning and Development. We met with Commissioner Carney, who at the time was the commissioner over the Department of Transportation, Alderman Dow, Alderman Robinson, 4th Ward Alderman Robinson, 3rd Ward Alderman Dow. And at that meeting, October 15th, 2024, we mutually agreed to the following: that the city would invest $5 million to activate the project. And the first spend would be on what's called, Chinta, the framework plan. Now, the framework plan is an urban planning document that requires a lot of community input. We had our first open house relative to the framework plan on June 3rd. And then after the framework plan is completed, which we anticipate first quarter 2027, then we will go right into phase 1 construction per the city of Chicago. That'll be supervised by the Department of Transportation, whereas the framework plan is supervised by the Department of Planning and Development. Once phase 1 construction is completed, roughly in 2028, 2029, we'll go right into phase 2 construction. And hopefully that'll be completed, 2030, 2031. And just to level set for your listening audience, phase 1, as I mentioned, the framework plan is an urban planning document. Phase 1 construction is architectural drawings, some engineering work to sort of get their arms around the cost of such a project. Phase 2 construction is much more engineering, where they get granular on the actual cost of the project. 1 hammer, 2 nails, and a screwdriver. And it's the phase 2 work, Chinta, that becomes the basis of government or whomever issuing a task order, an RFP, to general contractors to actually construct the project. So now I did leave some things out because I thought I needed to race to the end. But we really want to commend former Commissioner Maurice Cox. We kind of view him as our fairy godfather, if I may. just nothing again, but nothing but God, Chinta. Maurice Cox came to Chicago in 2019 before the pandemic. And he actually looked at the embankment, unbeknownst to us. Had, totally two separate events, completely disconnected. But Commissioner Cox was a trail expert, having been Commissioner of Planning in Detroit, where he provided leadership to trail development. Also in Houston, at present, Commissioner Cox is teaching at Harvard University. And so he was an expert in trail development. He worked on the High Line in New York City. And so he knew exactly the steps that needed to be taken to make this occur. And so the very first thing he did was introduce us to some architects and engineers to be a part of our team. The second thing he did, Chinta, is he ordered through the Department of Planning a feasibility study that was commissioned in August of 2022. The study took place for about 4 months, and it was released at a community charrette in December of 2022. An official copy went to the city in January of 2023. And the crux of the study, again, it was a feasibility study, and the conclusion was John and Chinta could walk up there and it won't fall down. Now, I'm being a bit facetious, but, that's because it's that embankment literally was 120 years old as we speak. It was built in 1907, so 119 years old. Correct math.
All right.
That they need to make sure.
Hold that thought. We have to take a break. We'll be back with more of On the Case right after this.
Great. Okay, awesome.
Great.
Great day. It's your girl Asada here to introduce a new female solution show called Asada Says. That's right. Every month we're going to talk about everything I am, from cryptocurrency and financial security to good health and parenting strategies. Come on and talk with me every Tuesday morning from 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. And let's do that thing the way Asada says it should be done. See you then. Peace, right here on the Female Solution.
Peace and love. I'm Michelle Renee, host of Education Nation, live on the Female Solution Global Network every second and fourth Sunday from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. The intention of Education Nation is to raise awareness about the literacy crisis and to offer information to combat the problem. The goal is to awaken an army of reading coaches and mentors. You will experience guests who are doing their part in the community to ensure youth in their circles are reading and thinking critically. I look forward to serving you in this capacity. Literacy is freedom, and Education Nation will offer information and strategies to help ensure our young people stay free.
All right, we're back. I'm Chinta Strausberg, producer and host of On the Case, and I have a very, very special guest, and his name is John Adams, and he is founder and executive director of the Bronzville Trail Task Force. And yeah, I do have a lot of questions. You keep talking about an embankment. What are you talking about, and where is this embankment?
Okay. So Chinta, literally back in right after the Civil War, the Chicago Union Stockyards was formed. And Chinta, growing up here, certainly I'm at least old enough that I remember the smells, right? So I knew of the stockyards. If the wind was blowing in a certain direction, you asked your mom and dad, what's that smell? Or if you drove near the stockyards. But anyway, in 1865, a number of independent stockyards came together to form the Chicago Union Stockyards. And I always thought unions had something to do with labor unions, but not at all. There was a partnership of independent stockyards in the back of the yards community. And they began meeting with the railroads. And by the early 1880s, laid a 4-mile rail line from the lakefront to the stockyards. And with that 4-mile rail line, Chinta, they were able to bring in livestock, process those meats, and then ship out produce. And literally, Chinta, this rail line is the remnants of the stockyard line that propelled Chicago to become known as hog butcher of the world. For 2 or 3 decades, more meats were processed in Chicago than anywhere else in the world, and certainly produced giant companies like Swiss, Armor Meats, and also built up the industry in Chicago to help Chicago become a great metropolis. So it's one of the foundational industries that led us to become this great city we are. And certainly it coincides with the fact that we were the crossroads of the United States during the height of rail travel. And so as we learn this rich history about the embankment and its predecessor, the stockyard line, certainly it's very intuitive to also understand that there's a migration story associated with this project. Real simple, Chinta, our people, as they migrated to Chicago, and certainly Chicago's famous for at least 2 waves of great migration. They came from the South, they came from farms, they came from sharecropping, etc., plantations. And Chinta, they already knew how to slaughter livestock. As we used to say in the hood growing up, they already knew how to cut up a pig from the rooter to the tutor.
I've never heard that.
And they went into the stockyards, Chinta. They came to Chicago, walked, ride, however they got there, 1 mile from Bronzeville, and they were hired on the spot. Why? Because they already had on-the-job training, Chinta. They already knew how to slaughter livestock. So many African Americans began working in the stockyards, helped made the stockyards the great place where livestock was slaughtered throughout this country, propelled Chicago to become the meat processing capital of the world for 2 or 3 decades. And so that's the connection with our migration history, that literally those African Americans became their children who were educated here in Chicago, attended, Phillips High School and other elementary schools, were able to have an education. Whereas many of them who migrated here, perhaps, they dropped out of school because they had to work the fields, et cetera, and so forth. But their children became sort of the foundational middle class of the 20th century Black Chicago.
Because of the stockyards.
Because their parents worked in the stockyards.
Wow.
Their parents had jobs, regular jobs. They, if they were making $1.50 a week in the South working sharecropping, they were making $1.50 a day in Chicago and were Negro rich come Sunday, and went to church to Quinn Chapel, Pilgrim, Missionary Baptist Church, et cetera, and so forth. So it's just such.
So what are the boundaries of Bronzeville?
So let me answer your question first about where the embankment is. It runs east to west, essentially along 40th Street, 40. And so pre Dan Ryan, it was all grade level, right? But there was a trestle for the stockyard line, and then the embankment that we're referring to was later known as the Kenwood L embankment, and the CTA operated service on that embankment. That service terminated in 1957. And so literally there, you can see iconic photos, for example, of Emmett Till's funeral in 1955. And you can clearly see the embankment and the trestle that the train ran on in the background of those photos.
So is that on Michigan or Indiana?
So it's running east to west, okay, not north south. Okay. And so it crosses, yeah. So Roberts Temple, yes, is on 40th and State Street. And so it runs essentially now from the Metro line, the embankment where the Metro train is located, approximately Dearborn Street, and it runs from Dearborn all the way east to Lake Park. and Lake Park. From the Lake Park stop on that rail line, you can see the lakefront will connect to the lakefront bike trail. And then for those communities, Chinta, and this is a big deal, what I'm about to share with you, for those communities west of the Dan Ryan, they can cross over the Dan Ryan at Root Street, turn 1 block north, jump on the Bronzeville Trail, and go all the way to the lakefront safely without traffic. And certainly hardly a month goes by, we don't hear about a tragic incident of a cyclist being struck by an automobile. And usually we just hear about the ones where the cyclist was killed. Those sorts of accidents happen more often than it's reported. Now, to your second question about Bronzeville and its boundaries, that is really the appropriate question, very challenging question, because it all kind of really depends on the time frame. Bronzeville and Chinta, I've taken the time to do the research. There was a burgeoning, a growing Black community in Chicago before 1900. And there were social clubs, there were churches, there were all sorts of activities. Certainly, the poster child of Black Chicago right after 1900 was Robert Sinstack Abbott being the founder of the Chicago Defender in 1905. So why would a guy, take the time to launch a newspaper unless there was enough readership, right, that was targeted to African Americans? So there was a sizable community leading up to the first migration, which, and both migrations are essentially tied to and built around the two world wars, World War I. And certainly Abbott is well documented that the Chicago Defender was a newspaper taken into South by Pullman porters and others, literally at their own risk, because Abbott in the Chicago Defender used to promote, come north, you can get a job, have a better living for yourself, your family, receive an education. And, one of the things, Chinta, that I take great pride in is an understanding there's something extremely unique about our migration story from the Midwest than African Americans on the East Coast. And one way to quickly illustrate that is African Americans attended great institutions like Harvard and Yale, right? W.B. Du Bois attended Harvard, received a degree from Harvard. Paul Laurence Dunbar received his law degree from Columbia Law School in 1923. Well, it was 40 years later, Chinta, in 1963, when George Wallace stood in the doorway to prevent someone from attending the University of Mississippi, yes. Right, 1963. On that very same day, President Kennedy went on national television announcing that he sent that he federalized state troopers to become National Guards to assist their admission to the University of Mississippi. And by the way, that same night, Chinta, Medgar Evers was shot in the back as he and other members of the NAACP watched President Kennedy's speech, one of the greatest of speeches in presidential history on civil rights, by the way. So there's a lot of rich history of the migration story. And so what we know is that, and this is all well documented, that African Americans in Chicago essentially came from the Deep South. Many came from Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Kentucky, Arkansas, and all, again, very simply, because of the rail line. There was a rail traffic that originated in New Orleans and a train that came due north from New Orleans to Chicago. It made about 5 other stops in Mississippi. In fact, it made a stop in Memphis, which is like a tri-state stop, right? Tennessee, Mississippi, Arkansas, and then continued north to Chicago. So
And
many of our people came
this began about in the Great Migration began around 1865 when blacks were free from slaves, or was it after?
That was after. Yeah, I mean,
After.
we began to come here certainly throughout the late 80s, but in terms of the migration, which was well documented, the greatest mass movement of people in this country,
Mhm.
that essentially is sort of considered something that occurred right after World War I through the 1920s, maybe hampered a bit by the Depression, 1930s, but still there was, significant movement. And then the second migration really occurred right in the mid 1940s during World War II, as African Americans came to Chicago, work in factories, and certainly right after World War II in the late 40s and throughout the mid 50s.
Right. Okay. So when I think it's on State Street in the 40s, I see bits of steel, like maybe there was a train there. Do you know
Oh yeah,
what
oh
is
yeah.
that?
Yeah.
I've
Well,
always been curious about that.
sure. Well, as you know, before uh, rail cars were so of course first there was the locomotives, right? And then rail cars were electrified as streetcars, and they ran on the streets. And so certainly, you find the right spot in Chicago, you might find a rail line sticking out of the ground, just a small portion of it, because pretty much all of them have been covered now for decades. But certainly, yeah, those rail cars are on some of our streets where they were street level rail cars that were electrified.
So why isn't that removed? Because it's just sitting there.
That's kind of shocking to me because most of the streets have been certainly concrete over and asphalt over by now, and you don't even know they're there.
Okay.
So take a photo. Please send that to me. I'd love to see it.
I will. Okay, so we're to take a break. We'll be back with more with John Adams right after this.
Thank you.
Have you seen all the solar farms popping up everywhere? You know, the big fields with the solar panels. There's one in our community. They produce electricity using the clean energy of the sun to send to the power grid to reduce our energy costs. Because not everybody can get solar panels put on their roof the way I have, but everybody can enroll for free to share the energy produced by the solar farms. That's why they were built. You know you're supposed to be getting a 10 to 20% savings on your bill for that, right? Illinois has a goal to transition by 2050 to 100% clean energy. So everybody needs to be connected. People in other communities are already getting their savings. So I'll be by to see you because they want to make sure you get your savings as well. It just takes a few minutes. I'm Naima Latif. Call me if you have any questions. 312-849-3456.
Okay, we are back. I'm Chinta Strausberg, producer and host of On the Case, and my guest is John Adams. He's founder and executive director of the Bronzeville Trail Task Force. Now, tell me something, John, about this bike trail. It goes from where to where? And
So,
is this your really goal for this whole project? Is to have safe travel for bicyclists?
so Chinta, these trails are so much more, so much more. So it's just not a bike trail, walking and running as well, right? But the way they proliferated now, certainly there are plenty of studies have been done on their impact at this junction. And they're also means of transportation. So, it's sort of looking at it a little differently. That besides running, walking, biking, that literally these sort of trail projects become a means of transportation. In fact, in Detroit, and this just tickled me to death, Chinta, people take one of the trails in Detroit to get to church on Sunday. so they're a new pathway, right, through a neighborhood, through a community, and so in addition to the impact they have with their own construction costs, and the Bronzeville Trail will cost over $100 million. Commissioner Maurice Cox said that the trail would also induce over $1 billion of investment in Bronzeville. Literally, Chinta, this project is going to prove to be, and I'll debate it with anyone, the most transformative and catalytic project in the history of Bronzeville. And so it's a 1.7 mile embankment. It'll be a 1.7 mile trail. And one of the things that we're embracing more now than ever is how this project, again, really embraces our culture and the rich history of Bronzeville. So within a 10-minute walk north or south of the Bronzeville Trail is just a significant number of historic monuments, landmarks, markers, places where people have lived, and they're continuing to come online, as we speak. Some of them are happening so quickly, they're not even making maps that already exist. So to get back to your question, I guess this kind of connects to it. So Bronzeville, originally, and first, certainly it's worth mentioning that it was a writer for the Chicago Bee that first gave the community the name Bronzeville because of the color of our skin. And this is back in the early 1930s. But as we talked about Senstack and the Chicago Defender, there were African Americans in the community was known as the Black Metropolis, more so back then as a community name. And commerce, we became a city within a city. There's no other way to say it. And certainly that was a consequence of segregation, right, in the city of Chicago. And certainly the 1919 race riots, are famous to illustrate the kind of racial strife that we all had during that time. But, everything we needed, everything we wanted was right in Bronzeville. You didn't have to leave Bronzeville to shop or buy anything for entertainment. Plenty jazz, blues places, and again, social clubs, fraternities, sororities, church groups, and certainly the home of many very significant Black churches that had, thousands of members in their congregations at that time. So Bronzeville, typically early on, the 20s, the 30s, and I'm talking about street addresses. Jack Johnson's lived, in the 1900 block of before you get to 22nd Street. But by the time you cross 22nd Street, you're really into a small slither of Chicago that was known as Bronzeville, essentially between what we would call King Drive today and State Street. And that was that corridor that when you get into the 2000s and the 3000th Street, 30th Street and on, that was Bronzeville. 35th was the early hotspot of Bronzeville. Binga Arcade was on the corner of 35th and State. Binga Bank was located at 35th and State. And I like to mention Mr. Binga because as we talk about Bronzeville, Chinta, he eventually bought a home of 5900 block South King Drive, right? But so Bronzeville grew, and certainly as we migrated here and we're just coming in droves. 35th Street soon had to give way to 47th Street, where the Regal was, and and you had churches that were just growing hand over fist. Certainly, a lot of you had Quinn Chapel, which was a site of the Underground Railroad, Quinn Chapel, and then you had Pilgrim Baptist Church, known as the home of gospel music, and many other churches, Metropolitan. I mean, just so many, Liberty Baptist, and then you had a huge increase in the number of Catholic churches, principally because Catholic churches had elementary schools. So you had St. Elizabeth's, you had Holy Angels, you had Corpus Christi. And even so now, as we talk about the migration story, back in the 20s, Corpus Christi almost closed due to segregation. The bishop at the time would not allow the parish to have integrated seating. And as Reverend Jackson used to say, the most segregated time in America is at 11 a.m. on Sundays.
That's right.
And so it was the early 1930s where the Franciscans were able to persuade the bishop that, look, I mean, these black folk, they coming up here in droves. I mean, we got to permit integrated seating. And so that's kind of the story. And so I pinpoint that just to put a timeline to it. By the 1930s, certainly all the way up to Washington Park, and probably even beyond, were significant black areas, part of Bronzeville, what we would call Bronzeville today.
And I want to question about when you said segregated seating in the Catholic churches.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Of course.
What you mean? So when you say, of course,
yeah, of course. I mean, that was the way of life back then. Catholic.
They had black sections in Catholic churches.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay.
White churches too, right? I mean, Protestant churches, every Christian denomination, had segregated seating during that era. And again, and this is where our history is really rich, perhaps more so in the Midwest than the East Coast. And certainly there are religions that were more advocates of treating us like human beings, like the Quakers, right? Who were very much behind the abolitionist movement. Now I don't want to get too deep into that history, but it's well documented. Anyone can research it, that it was the Quakers who were more active as abolitionists than what we would call, certainly no Southern Baptists, right?
I did not know that, because I have a friend whose mother was a Quaker. Yes. And that's very interesting. Thank you for that.
Oh yeah, it is. And so it's much different coming out the East Coast than the Midwest migration, where we settled in Detroit, Cleveland, Chicago, the industrial base of the country, because they needed, and see, the wars contributed to that, right? As white Americans went off and fought in the wars because they didn't want us fighting in the army. Remember, that was a struggle. Someone had to fill the factories, and so it was black men and black women during that era. They worked in the factories as white males went off to war.
Now you said that this project will create more than $1 billion for the Bronzeville. How so? Are you talking about black businesses starting businesses along this trail, or no?
That's certainly part of it. And so Commissioner Cox, the point he was making is, and he said it would induce over $1 billion of investment. And so he was just not talking about small business creation or business creation. He was also talking about housing. He was also referring to more recreational opportunities, more green space. We just began a partnership with the Bronzeville Community Farm, literally 1 block from the embankment. So imagine this, Chinta, and certainly perhaps you're aware of community farms in different neighborhoods in Chicago. We literally have a community farm named the Bronzeville Neighborhood Farm, 1 block from the Bronzeville Trail.
Where is that? Where is it?
It's approximately 41st and Calumet. And
you actually have animals on there, or no?
No, it grows vegetables and other perennials and annuals, but certainly it makes all the sense in the world that when it comes time to populate the embankment with shrubbery, with annuals, perennials, we'll be purchasing them from a neighborhood business 1 block away.
So does that business, is it up and running now? And can people go buy
Yes.
vegetables there?
Yes, that's correct. It is.
Okay.
It is. I can't tell you how
7
long
days,
it's been around. I think
7
it's been
days a
around at
week?
least I think it's been around at least a decade. You know.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And you can actually go there, how many, 5 times a day? I mean, 5 days a week or what?
You know, so I don't know the exact hours, and certainly I can connect you with the proprietor of that farm. But they do have some open hours where people come by. And of course, again, this is a farm, so it's seasonal too, right?
Oh, yeah, right. Uh-huh.
So if you go there now, you may not can buy anything except what's in season.
Well, you know, at St. Sabino, we have a farm. I don't know if you knew that or not.
Sure. And
A
then
chicken farm.
chicken
And
farm.
a vegetable farm.
Okay. All right now. So I don't know if she has chickens, but it's a vegetable farm for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so also, you know, because of people who want to visit Bronzeville, it's just going to create an enormous amount of, you know, foot traffic, cycling traffic, people walking, riding, running through Bronzeville, you know, who'll learn of the Bronzeville Winery, who'll learn of Norman's Bistro, who'll learn of, you know, all of the Truth's Restaurant and all these other establishments that they can experience right in Bronzeville, and certainly all the other academic institutions. Dawson Technical College is one of our partners in our summer enrichment program. Dawson, Chinta, is literally 30 feet from the embankment. And again, the embankment is adjacent to Robert's Temple.
All right, we have to take a break. We'll be back with more with John Adams right after this.
Thank you, Chinta.
Welcome.
In which we're doing this documentary for, Douglas Robinson, Your Death Will Not Be in Vain.
He was a heck of a great dude. And I love Doug. Doug loved me.
Just being around him, he had a good spirit. He was a healing person.
They are there.
Get SROs back.
When you give to the poor,
should not be forced out of their neighborhoods when it goes through a period of transformation.
Because there are too many people who are losing their homes to taxes because they can't pay a $1,000 tax bill.
We're back. I'm Chinta Strausberg, producer and host of On the Case. And my guest is John Adams. He's founder and executive director of the Bronzeville Trail Task Force. Amazing story. A lot of secrets in Bronzeville. But I still want to know, what was Bronzeville before it was Bronzeville? Because it wasn't always Bronzeville community.
No. And Chinta, you know, Chicago's history is one annexation, right, of other smaller communities.
Mm-hmm.
Hyde
We
Park.
have 77 communities.
77 communities. You know, Hyde Park was its own city. Beverly was its own town. But much of Chicago was prairie land, right? And so Chicago, you know, was, there was farming in Chicago. That was the major industry probably at one time. But of course, Chicago really grew as a result of its location in the country and became the cross center of the United States, especially when rail, right? Because this all predates interstate. And so as the railroad industry grew, Chicago grew. And so to go from east to west, the shortest route would be to come right under Lake Michigan, right? And there we are, the crossroads of the United States. So with that, certainly as industry proliferated in Chicago, and we talked about the stockyard industry, certainly there was the steel industry, right? It also grew in Chicago. And Chicago also grew as a service industry town, you know, so retail, right? Marshall Field's, a big name in this city's history. You know, other type of service orientation, attorneys, lawyers, you know, the Board of Trade, the Mercantile Steel Exchange. So Chicago also built up banking, right, as an industry. So because of all of the industry and manufacturing that was here, and the manufacturing, I mean, you could just go on and on. Everything, literally everything, if you spent around in your chair, at one time, everything you look at probably was made here in Chicago, literally. So, and so, you know, those were factories, and certainly the largest bike manufacturer in the country, Schwinn Bicycle Company, was here in Chicago, as we talk about cycling. So yeah, so that's that. So the housing certainly had to accommodate that. You know, Chicago's, you know, rich for its architecture. Certainly the bungalows. You know, as you know well, there's certain neighborhoods that are just full of bungalows, or multi-flat buildings, right? Apartment buildings, big units, courtyards, etc. So Chicago built itself out as it grew and required a larger populations. People came here to get jobs.
Well, absolutely. Now, we used to have the horse and buggy before Alderman the Terrace got rid of them. I love that. But that was a way to get to know Chicago. So not everybody rides a bicycle. So will you have like a van or something to take people around so that you can tell people these different historical spots in Bronzeville?
So we don't, but certainly those types of services are already available. There's a arts tour, Gallery Gashard, and other galleries in Bronzeville partner up for an arts tour, and they use a bus. Probably the one that people may hear around. Well, there are two that you perhaps hear about the most. One is the tour conducted by Bernard Turner, who is the executive director of the Bronzeville Black Metropolis organization, and also Six Figure Dilla, who has just what he's accomplished in less than a decade is just phenomenal. And he does a Bronzeville tour with his bus, so as he does in many other neighborhoods as well. So there are some tours already in existence. You know, we're not trying to be all things to everyone, and certainly, you know, we could, if we were to have a tour, Chinta, we actually would look to partner, probably with Bernard Turner and Dilla, and the arts tour during the summer, because these tours are already in existence. So rather than reinvent the wheel, you know, we're trying to be hyper-focused on this trail project because it's very easy to be distracted. But I would like to mention some of our ancillary projects while we still have some time. One is the Summer Enrichment Program, where we're training our future architects, construction owners, and engineers. And typically those programs are called ACE programs, architecture, construction, and engineering. Another program that we're very excited about, we call our Bronzeville Trail History Project. And I've talked about that a great deal. We've had symposiums around that really talk about the migration story relative to Bronzeville. And we received a substantial grant from the Mellon Foundation, where we conducted archival research on the rail line itself, the Bronzeville community. And that has morphed into arts in residency program, again, to highlight and illustrate and tell the story of Black culture as it exists in Bronzeville historically and today. And so those are just a couple of, I call them companion programs. One last one has to do with Marshall Major Taylor, who was the first African-American international sports champion in cycling.
I was going to ask you about that. Can you tell us about that quickly?
Would love to. Marshall Major Taylor was born in Indianapolis around 1876. His dad fought on the side of the Union in the Civil War. He was a carriage driver, and his dad ended up a carriage driver for a wealthy white family in Indianapolis. And Marshall was the playmate of their son. And at the time they bought their son a bicycle, they bought Marshall a bicycle. Well, Marshall was the Michael Jordan on a bicycle. I mean, just God-given talent. He was hired by a local retail store to perform bicycle stunts and attract customers to the store. Literally, this is how he got started. And he wore a military-style uniform, and that's how he got the nickname Major. And so that stuck with him. The store owner entered him in cycling races where he fared extremely well as a young teenager, and literally moved Major to Worcester, to the East Coast, to Worcester, Massachusetts, because we're talking about Indianapolis, Indiana, Southern Indiana, the home of the KKK, and he was just not welcome to race in the South, and so in order for him to have a career in cycling, his trainer moved him to the East Coast, and that's where he began to race in the late 1880s, early 1890s. He raced here in Chicago and set 4 world records in Garfield Park. And so we're working on him having appropriate recognition in Garfield Park. But Chicago sort of became like his second home. He moved here after ending a stellar career, was one of the wealthiest Black men in the world during the early part of the 20th century, owned homes, property, multiple cars, lived in Worcester, Massachusetts. But a lot of his investments suffered like many other investors did during the Great Depression, right? And so he had written his autobiography, and literally, Chinta, he raced all over the world. His daughter, he had one child, her name is Sydney, named after Sydney, Australia. But he raced all through Europe, where he was more welcome. They loved him in France, and he raced all over the world again. But when he wrote his autobiography, Chinta, he knew he needed to appeal to Black people. And so he moved to Chicago to sell his autobiography, and he lived at the Wabash YMCA, which is on 38th and Wabash in Bronzeville. So he moved here in 1930. He died, took ill in 1932, went to Providence Hospital. They moved him to Cook County Hospital. He died in Cook County Hospital. He's buried in Mount Glenwood Cemetery in the south suburbs. And when he made his transition, Chinta, the first newspaper to publish his death notice, which was an article actually, was the Chicago Defender. And even his family and many of his fans from all over the world, they did not know of his passing until they learned it from the Chicago Defender. And that's just a fact. And so finally in 1948, Frank Schwinn, and I talked about Chicago and Schwinn Manufacturing, some professional cyclists and Frank Schwinn paid Chinta to have the body removed in 1948 from a pauper grave to the Memorial Garden, where he rests right now. And there was a big ceremony around that. Ralph Metcalf, former Olympian, attended that ceremony, and others. And so interestingly, Chicago has this rich connection to Major Taylor. So as someone says, possession's 9/10 of the law. We have the body. And there's also the first bike trail in the country named after Major Taylor is here in Chicago, the Major Taylor Trail. And then lastly, there's a gorgeous mural over the Little Calumet River. The longest mural in the world dedicated to Major Taylor is here in Chicago over the Little Calumet River, approximately 130th Street, 131st Street, and let's say Low, where the bridge is that goes over the Little Calumet River. So we have this rich connection to Marshall Major Taylor. Our organization, as we learned about all of this and learned that he lived at Wabash Y, and a woman who helped save Wabash Y from the wrecking ball, Patricia Abrams, was on our board. As we learned this, we said, Pat, did you know Major Taylor lived at Wabash Y? And she said, sure, we learned that. But since the remodeling of Wabash Y, we don't know where, what room he stayed in. The floor plan has changed. But as we learned rich history, we began to advocate for him to get more civic recognition.
Okay, so how does one get in touch with you?
So certainly via email, and I can be reached at Bronzeville Trail at gmail.com, and that's Bronzeville Trail at gmail.com. Certainly everyone is welcome to go to our website, www.bronzevilletrail.org. There's also a link there to send us an email. And Chinta, this is a big project. So we truly have a Big Ten approach to it. Everyone is welcome. If you see a space where you're interested, you're more than welcome to assist and volunteer. And also, Chinta, and I say this on your show, I say this openly, also to the Black business community, to any community, if you see an opportunity for yourself, go for it. Because it's that kind of project. So if you ever had the passion to open, say, for example, a bicycle shop, well, guess what? Start planning on putting one in Bronzeville because we need more bicycle shops as this trail opens and as we provide access to the lakefront bike trail, as well as access to people who live west of the Dan Ryan.
John Adams, thank you so very much. Executive Director, Founder and Executive Director of the Bronzeville Trail Task Force. Thank you so much for being on the case.
Thank you, Chinta. We'll be happy to come back as this project continues to mature to fruition.
Thank you.
We've come to the end of our show today. If you missed any broadcasts, go to our website for the audio and video archives at www.thefemalesolution.com. On behalf of our team of radio hosts, I'd like to thank all of you who participated in today's discussions. And to our global family joining us from all around the world, we say thank you. To our family in China, xie xie. India, dhanyavad. Japan, arigato. Korea, kamsamnida. Russia, spasiba. Germany, danke. Poland, dziękuję. France, merci. Spain, gracias. Italy, grazie. Egypt, shukran. Ghana, madasi. Nigeria, eshe. South Africa, ngiyabonga. Senegal, jareh. Kenya, asante. Israel, toda. Pakistan, shukriya. Afghanistan, tashakur. Saudi Arabia and Palestine, shukran. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Thank you, and may peace be upon you and the mercy of God and God's blessings.